Look around. You can find cars like these on AutoTrader, like that car riding your tail. Or if you're tailgating right now, all those cars doubling as kitchens and living rooms are on AutoTrader too. Are you working out and listening to this ad at the same time? Well, multitasking pro, cars like the ones in the gym parking lot are for sale on AutoTrader. New cars, used cars, electric cars, maybe even flying cars. Okay, no flying cars, but as soon as they get invented, they'll be on AutoTrader. Just you wait. AutoTrader.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Visit progressive.com to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states or situations.
Hello, this is Simon Brew. I'm the editor of Film Stories magazine, and a very warm welcome to the Film Stories podcast. I'd like to particularly thank the people who've gone out of their way this week to just tell me if my intros go on a little too long.
It goes on like that for a while.
For how long?
24 minutes.
Come with me.
And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
And movies that had stories.
That the story just sucks them in.
This is just the beginning.
Stories. We would be honored if you would join us.
Hello, and a very warm welcome to Film Stories with Simon Brew. I am Simon Brew, as always. That's absolutely everything you need to know about me. The aim of the podcast, though, well, it's given away by the title. I'm here to talk of the stories of films, and I tend to talk about development stories, production stories, marketing stories, release stories. All those ingredients, really, that go towards making the films that we know and sometimes love. Just that, the films that we know and sometimes love. The films I tend to cover on this podcast, they lean more towards the mainstream than anything else. They're films I'm interested in or invested in to some degree. I try really hard not to do snark. I try really hard not to punch down. This podcast is a celebration of cinema and a real appreciation that somehow, films manage to get made. Enough preamble. In each regular episode of the Film Stories show, I talk about the stories of two different films, and I'm going to get on with the first of them. As always, I'm just going to set this up with a clip from the trailer in question. I'll come to the story the other side of this.
What if that guy did this to your car?
What guy? The clown? You really think someone slashed my tires?
Well, he knows this is your car. He saw us getting into it earlier.
Hey, handsome!
Cut it out.
My friend wants your number.
Kill you.
What is it, Tara?
Dawn and I are sort of stranded. She has a flat tire and no spare, and I was kind of hoping you could pick us up. Wrong with you?
What, did you think he was going to hack me up into little pieces or something?
The story then of 2016's Terrifier, written and directed by Damien Leone. I'm going with Leone. It might be Leone for the purposes of this. I'm going with Leone. Written by Leone as well and produced by Leone, Phil Fancoli and George Stuber. The cast led by Jenna Cannell, Samantha Scafidi, David Howard Thornton and Catherine Corcoran in a particularly memorable, well, if you've seen the film, you'll know where this is going, a particularly memorable moment in the movie itself. So the story of Terrifier then, I mean, we're going right the way back to a couple of short films really that Damien Leone was making, that he has a huge subset of skills in visual special effects work, practical special effects work. And as he would tell the website Morbidly Beautiful, I made my first short film when I got out of my one filmmaking class. Love that. He says, I didn't go to a big film school. I took an introductory aesthetic aesthetics of filmmaking class because when I got out of high school, I knew I didn't want to do anything except make movies. And he said the cool thing would have been to go to film school, but I didn't have the money. The class that he did attend wasn't really, though, teaching him about the films that he was actually interested in making. Now, they were talking about people like Godard and films and filmmakers he really respected, but he knew the kind of films he wanted to make. I mean, he loved slasher movies and he had his eyes on, in time, a killer clown film. And so rather than going to the film school he couldn't really afford to go to, he talked his mum into giving him the money to make a film. So the idea was that he would get this short film together. He would throw everything into it. It would be almost like a statement of intent, a statement of capability as well. Throw in some of the effects work that he could that he was able to do. Throw in as much as possible with the idea that it's a showcase for what he can do. Then he would send the short film off to festivals, and the idea was get it picked up somewhere, but really get him noticed. Hopefully someone would notice it and give him work in the film industry. So the short film, 2008's The Ninth Circle, would centre on a clown that was terrorising people. And when people saw The Ninth Circle, it was the clown that they responded to. This was the first screen appearance of what would become Art the Clown. And so Leone was listening, but it was going to take him time to get his second short film moving. The stuff he was trying to do was ambitious. And this time he would do a short film, Terrifier, that would put Art the Clown centre stage in the midst of it all. And here he turned Art the Clown into a slasher movie character, a character pursuing a woman as she tried to escape him. Very traditional slasher movie as well, stuff in there. But all the while he was learning more of his craft and people were responding again to this clown. So could he upgrade this to a feature film? That was going to be the next challenge for him. So, he was recruiting friends and people he knew to help put these films together. And the casting of Art the Clown included, it was Mike Gianelli who would play him in the characters, in the short films, and also in the character's feature film debut. And that would come in the 2013 movie, All Hallows Eve. Now, this was an anthology film, a series of little stories that had Art the Clown at the heart of it. And it used material from the two short films he'd done to this point, and it was a film. Damien Leone had made a film, had got it out into the world, it turned up on disc, got middling reviews, no one was going head over heels for it, but it was out there. He got his work there. And so he was at the point where he want to go for a feature, but a feature based around the Art the Clown character. Now, I should point out there is an All Hallows Eve 2 that followed a couple of years later. This would be different filmmakers telling their stories. Damien Leone had very, very light involvement in that. I think there was a point as well where they tried to resell the film with Art the Clown now front and centre of the promotion of it, and I don't think people were particularly impressed with that. But also Mike Gianelli was hanging up his clown outfit. He was retiring from acting, and so Damien Leone this time was going to need a new actor to play Art the Clown. And so he found this website, Actors Access, and was looking at the tapes that actors had uploaded there to see if there's anyone that really struck out. He knew the kind of thing that he was after. He was after a mime. He wanted a silent character, but a very expressive one with comedic bones as well, but also who could convey a kind of sinister edge to their work. And so, as he explained in a Reddit Ask Me Anything session, in the end, he held auditions, and he'd seen this guy on the Actors Access website called David Howard Thornton, and he got his reps. Just come along to the audition. They were held in Manhattan. The idea was we're after, quote, a silent killer clown. The whole character of Art the Clown, just designed as a cross between, I don't know, Jack the Ripper and the devil, really, a kind of blend of the two of them. And so David Howard Thornton was about I think it was the sixth person who walked in the room, and he had to do this improv. And the improv was pretend you're sneak up behind someone and pretend to decapitate them. Well, after he'd put his performance in, and the audition is online, you can find it fairly easily via social media, the auditions stopped dead. And as Damien Leone said, I shut down the auditions and said, he's our guy. So, I mean, this was starting to move forward. This wasn't going to be an expensive film to make, but it got to a point where pre-production on an Art the Clown film called Terrifier, a full-length feature, Terrifier, could begin all the way back, actually, to at the end of 2014. So there is a Facebook page for Art the Clown, and if you go right the way back through all of the posts on it, as I might have done, you can trace the history of how Terrifier started off with very, very, very small beginnings to the newly released Terrifier 3, just as this podcast is being and video has been recorded. And so, I mean, in December 2014, it looked like there was progress. Pre-production work was underway. And then there's another announcement that comes along in March of 2015. Pre-production, underway. We're going to start shooting in April. But things didn't go to plan. That this was, this was a case of an independent movie having to be nimble. And in the world of independent movies, and not least horror, money just falls apart with alarming regularity. And so, I mean, you follow then the assorted updates that appear on this Facebook page. And so we move forward to, it's done my work for me, really, April the 9th, 2015. This was around the time they'd originally been planning to start shooting. And the post reads, "Hello, everyone. We have some potentially exciting news for you guys. And here's the hint of what was happening. After months of being strung along by investors, either full of BS, I wonder what that stands for, or having ridiculous demands, such as cut out the graphic violence, they posted, we've decided to try funding Terrifier ourselves through a Kickstarter campaign. Kickstarter, the most popular crowdfunding service. They wouldn't use Kickstarter in the end, but they would use crowdfunding. And I mean, they'd almost resigned themselves. If you look at the tone of what they were writing, at this point, the only people we can rely on are the die-hard Art the Clown fans. And if anyone will be responsible for getting this project off the ground, it's you. And so they went to Indiegogo, and they were after around $15,000, £11,000 if you're in the UK. And I mean, it was a case of they just didn't get all of that cash. You look at the success that the Terrifier films have had since, I think they got, 3,000-4,000 off the initial crowdfunding run. Now, because they'd gone with Indiegogo, the upside of that was it's not like Kickstarter. Kickstarter, you have to raise your target, else you get nothing. It's all or nothing. Indiegogo, it meant they could get they could get what they raised. And so, I mean, as Leone would go on to say, he just said All Hallows Eve did bring positive notoriety to the Art the Clown character. And I mean, this is directly from the Kickstarter. You can still find the Indiegogo campaign page online. I've dug it out and it's writing here. He says, I feel it by no means does him justice. If that character has proven anything, it's that he deserves his own film, without the burden of other shorter stories being centered around him and a slightly bigger budget too. And so, as he wrote, Terrifier, the full-length feature, will be his time to shine and hopefully earn him a seat at the table of horror icons. Now, it would be Dread Central that would, in the end, pick up the film for distribution. Dread Central's logo is on all of the Terrifier films, and he explained in an interview with that site that he'd always wanted to make a film, and he said it was definitely the game plan all along. He said, I made the short film Terrifier in 2011 with the hope of raising money to make a full-length version. I mean, if you dig into the story of a film like Whiplash, it was the similar kind of thing there that Damien Chazelle made a shorter version of it. He shot an 12-minute short film version of Whiplash, and off the back of the success of that, he could raise the money to make the full thing. This was it again, but on a much smaller scale. And he said that the opportunity never arose. And so what happened instead, and what led actually to All Hallows Eve, was when a little company called Ruthless Pictures found the short film on YouTube, which was where the Terrifier short had gone to live, and that it was Ruthless Pictures that gave Leone the opportunity to go off and do All Hallows Eve. And he explained at that point, originally that film was supposed to be comprised of 3 Halloween-themed shorts from 3 different filmmakers, but the producer, Jesse Badgett, allowed him to use and create all of his own material for the film. And so what Leone said, and where this ties into the bigger Terrifier film, was that wasn't how I intended to present art to a larger audience, but it was the best opportunity at the time by far. It's the nimbleness of the independent filmmaker again. You seize the opportunity, you seize the moment when it appears, because Lord knows when it will appear again. And he just said, I'm grateful for the experience and the opportunity, plus it made a lot more people aware of art. So Terrifier was fundraising at this point, and a teaser was shot and edited. It was shot in April 2015. It was edited and got ready for May 2015. But a post on the Facebook page kind of preempted the big fundraising drive, because they wrote 3rd of May. This was 3rd of May. So what year are we in now? 2015. An investor sent from the movie gods, they wrote, or devils, has given, at their words, has given us roughly 85% of the money we need to get started. This is not millions of dollars, this is tens of thousands of dollars, but because Leone could do the special visual effects work himself, and his small team sort of knew what they were doing, it meant the budget could be really, really modest. And so, I mean, he was going to do the film unpaid, as quite a lot of people did the film unpaid. He was also, I mean, you dig into what he was doing in and around the movie just to get it made. He was making memorabilia as part of the crowdfunding drive, for instance. But going back to that 3rd of May post, with a little more help, I truly believe we can raise the rest through the Indiegogo campaign, which we'll be launching shortly. Let's do it. So that Indiegogo campaign did put extra funds in the pot. But also by this stage, it was Phil Falcone who'd come in to help and grease the wheels to get the movie funded, to help find financiers. And he would take a producer credit and a role in the movie. And as Leone would say, he was the only person who believed in us enough to back the film. So essentially, this movie would only exist on paper if it wasn't for him. So this is Phil Falcone, who's producer on all of the films now. And I mean, without whose input, it sounds like it might not have got off the launch pad at all. As they sign off the post, Phil, we are all forever grateful, and I hope we don't disappoint you, pal. It also notes that he was there. I mean, he was there getting his hands dirty, not metaphorically, in the midst of the production as well. But then the whole film was designed to be a simple, straightforward, lean, independent film, a really committed slasher film. And in terms of his approach to it, Damien Leone said, I figured if I could make Terrifier feel like the last 15 minutes of most slashers in which the villain is the star, it'd be a good start. He also knew that the villain, Art the Clown in this case, was to be ambiguous. Character development wasn't going to be a priority here. He was he was open to that in the future. I mean, he did say around the time of the launch of the first film, a sequel is inevitable, even though it wasn't, I don't know. And he said, I know exactly where to take Art the Clown next. However, if things go in a different direction for some reason, told you it wasn't inevitable, he said, I have a zombie dream project that I'd love to make. He's not made that yet. And a vampire film that I can do on a shoestring budget. He's not done that yet either. But the crucial part is it always comes down to money and opportunities. But I'll certainly be writing scripts and doing special effects on other people's projects until the next directing job comes along. Well, I mean, the story would continue in a way to his favour. We'll come to that shortly. But it was back to making Terrifier, a lot of prep. And I mean, this was all prep being done not on the biggest of budgets either, too. Very, very hands-on, Leone driving that forward. And I mean, at one point, a mould needed to be made of the actor Catherine Catherine Corcoran for, again, arguably the film's most infamous scene. But the story goes she became trapped in that mould for around an hour or so. They got to the point where they were on the verge of sending her to hospital to get her out of it. This was not a massively resourced studio environment for doing all the visuals. They were there. They were in the weeds doing all these themselves. And you see lots of the effects prep shots on the film's Facebook feed as well. Let's jump forward to the 22nd of July then, where, as much as the Indiegogo campaign didn't hit its target, it got enough for what they needed to do next. And the post reads, thank you so much to, well, it says so much, but thank you so much to everyone who's contributed to Terrifier's campaign. You're all true friends and fans, they write. The campaign's officially ended and we've raised $4,360. Now, this was on top of the 85% that had been found elsewhere. And it was enough. What it gave them was the finances they need to get the locations for the shoot of the film. They finally had enough money, not a lot of money, but enough money that they could press ahead and actually make the movie after false starts, after difficulties with financiers, after all the problems that have been thrown in their path. And so filming would begin on the 15th of October 2015. Now, this should have been quite a again, if this had been a studio production, this would have been quite a brief shoot. Actually, it went on for quite some time. And Leone would reflect that, you watch the film, you might think there's a crew of 100 on it. Read the credits. There really isn't. It's a really small crew building the sets themselves, doing the effects themselves. But on the plus side, they were actually making their movie. So the character of Art the Clown was posited by Damien Leone as kind of like the opposite of Pennywise from the It movies. Horror has no shortage of sinister looking clowns. I am an old Doctor Who nerd. Show me the episode The Greatest Show in the Galaxy. The clowns in that really scared me as a kid. Continue to scare me actually when I watched that. But they knew that they weren't just trying to do a photostat of what had gone before. So off came the hair. The voice was taken away from the character as well, and they were also using locations, real life locations where they could too. That there was a real life pizza place in New York, for instance, that they used for a sequence in the movie. Let's go with that. Proved to be quite a boon for its tourist credentials for a few years as well before it eventually closed. They also discovered tunnels below a disused hospital and they filmed in those as well. They were having to be, understandably, quite nimble about it all. Leone would talk about how the hacksaw scene in the film would be a really tricky one to put to camera, not least because he'd never had to build, let's just say, a full body replica of someone before. He said that in a Reddit AMA session. Leone was he was doing the special effects, he was editing, he was writing, he was directing. George Stuber was shooting the movie as well. But the budget, even if you look at the top end of what it was supposed to be, was sitting a maximum of $55,000. Just an absolute pittance for a full feature film. By the 17th of December, though, it looked like they were finished. Hey, guys, they posted, we're only a few more shooting days away from completing principal photography. I'll be posting lots of screen grabs, they teased, and Julie did so over the Christmas period. But tellingly, the film didn't actually complete its final shot until the 17th of March. Some 3 months later, they were still shooting. And herein is the other great unsaid with an independent film, that you basically have to film as and when you can shoot, when opportunity presents itself. There's a film shot near me, a Midlands movie called The Shamrock Spitfire, that they did about 10-20 days of photography on, but it was spread over 9 months. I wasn't sure that was quite the case with Terrifier, but certainly the shoot was going on for longer than a lot of Hollywood movies. If you remember, it started in October 2015. It wouldn't complete production until March the following year. That is a really long shoot for a film, but also it was an independent. The post-production initially was quicker though, because a first cut was being readied for May of 2016. So that's just under 3 months after they had completed photography on the movie. The promotion was being done in a very nimble gorilla with a U kind of way, that they were using social media a lot. They were teasing clips, they were teasing images from it. And also because this was playing to a core slasher movie crowd, there was a community slowly building up around it. That there were the imagery of Art the Clown was starting to pop up on t-shirts, on a very early tattoo as well. He's posted on the Facebook feed if you really want to get into the depths of that. And it was in October 2016 that the film got its world premiere at the Telluride Film Festival. Now, it played well at that festival as well, that as much as you're never going to get mainstream critics particularly going head over heels for a slasher movie, the response at Telluride was strong enough to get people more and more interested in the film. Now, what became clear over time was the cut that was shown at the world premiere was not going to be the final cut of the movie. That, however, let's move forward to November, a month after that premiere, and they were at that stage having to deal with distributors. They decided not to self-distribute the film. They reasoned if they had done, they would have already got it out there, but they were going through the lengthy process of doing distribution deals for the movie. So by early 2017, they were back to polishing their cut of the film. And they talked about how they were hesitant to show the movie originally in the state it was at the Telluride Film Festival. However, we're glad in hindsight that they did, not least because of all the doors that had opened as a result of it. But also, they noted we've made some significant changes to that version and added a very gruesome new murder scene. The cut was finally done and signed off in April of 2017, and by this stage the distribution was sorted. The distributors had the movie. The release was being plotted. Could they release it opposite the It film that was coming out in October of that year? That's possible. But also, this was never going to get a big cinema release. In fact, it barely got a cinema release. Instead, it was getting a lot of small screenings and Q&As with a build-up to a digital release and a DVD release in 2018, where it was expected that Terrifier would make its money. That there are, you don't need me to tell you, there are a lot of horror movies made each and every year, and a lot of them never see the inside of a cinema. They make a comfortable living just by being very low budget and finding a niche horror audience on streaming, on video on demand services, and on disc as well. However, the response to Terrifier was pretty good. I wouldn't say it was electric, but it was pretty good. And also, the people who appreciated genre fare were giving it middling to quite good reviews as well. Now, the more mainstream critics were being incredibly put off by the gore in the movie. I mean, Terrifier and its sequels simply doesn't hold back on the gore that it puts on screen, where other films would cut away. Leone sends his camera right so that we can see it all. And I mean, at a point where there was a degree of sanitization going on in horror cinema, there was something really pushing against the norm with Terrifier, even though this was where lots of horror, going into the 80s and stuff like that, tended to be planted once upon a time. Leone was, of course, a fan of slasher movies, and here was his, and it was getting noticed as well. And it was quite interesting, just over a period of time, how the word of mouth on the movie slowly built up. So, it picked up some genre awards towards the end of its first year, or certainly in 2017, 2018. It was picking up some recognition there. But the aftermath of Terrifier being released for the first time, and it got a US release in the end outside of that Telluride Festival in March of 2018. So that's nearly 18 months after its festival debut before it got a proper release where lots of us could actually feast our eyes on it. And so it was a really, really slow burn to get that noticed. In fact, if you look at the box office for the movie, it's I mean, it's hard to gauge, really, simply because it took a long time for Terrifier to get any kind of significant theatrical outing. That if you go to a site like Box Office Mojo, it'll tell you the film took, about 400,000 in cinemas around the world. But that official cinema release didn't come until July 2023 as part of the build-up and the tease towards one of the later sequels of the film. The movie, though, it was picking up its word of mouth by the continual pushing and banging of the drum on social media, the growing merchandise that Leone and his team were pushing forward, and then also more and more services were picking it up. So in 2018, they got the film onto Netflix, and that really helped. Also, a DVD and Blu-ray came out in 2018. It hit video on demand services in March of that year as well. And so the film was out in the world. You could track it down and you see it. Interestingly, in the UK, it got its first cinema release only this year, 2024, 8 years after the cinema debut, that Telluride world premiere debut of the movie, before we could see it here in a UK cinema. What this meant was, because it turned into such a slow burn success, because it took so much time really to find an audience of sufficient numbers, really, that the plans Leone had to do a Terrifier sequel were going to take a fair amount of time. It would be, 6 years between Terrifier and Terrifier 2 in the end. And, I mean, as much as the intent had been to scale up, they were funding the second film out of the proceeds, really, of the first. And when you put a film into distribution, the money doesn't flow. Even if you've made a reasonable amount of cash, the money doesn't flow straight away. It takes some time to land in your bank account. And even when they came to embark upon Terrifier 2, well, that was a movie that again was all hands on deck, a small crew. I mean, you would think, given the hype around Terrifier 3, which is just landing at the point this podcast is being recorded, that Terrifier 2 was a far more resourced production than it was. But no, for what they were trying to do, as much as they were scaling it up, the sequel would cost $250,000, so nearly 5 times as much as the first film. However, a longer film, a more ambitious film, and still, when it came to it, the core cast and crew knee-deep in fake gore and such like, trying to bring this to life with as much practical realism as they possibly could. Terrifier, though, has gone on against these very, very small beginnings. One of the reasons I was keen to tell the story on this particular episode was because it's the assumption that it hit big right from the start, and it really didn't. And so, again, we sit here nearly a decade after the first film, with the third movie coming out that's been dragged into existence by the core creative team, but a real labour of love for all of them. Outside of the Hollywood system, though, what it's allowed them to do, as they did with the first film, is to make as close as they can get to a film of this ilk without compromise, without focus group, without any bunch of Hollywood executives telling them what to do. And against significant odds, Terrifier has gone on to arguably be the indie film success, certainly in terms of horror franchises, of the decade.
Support your immune system with Airborne's most complete immune support formula yet. Airborne's delicious effervescent tablets are packed with 7 powerful ingredients to fill the holes your immune system may have, so that you can enjoy those unmissable moments in your life. Learn more at airbornecomplete.com. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.
And that brings me to the halfway point of this latest episode of Film Stories. As always, thank you so much for listening and thank you for your time. Just a couple of parish notices before I get on to the next movie. First of all, if you like this podcast and don't mind supporting it further, I mean, you've lent it your ears and thank you for that. If you head to patreon.com/SimonBrew and put some coins in the pot there, then you get the podcast early pretty much every week. You certainly get it ad-free as well. You find out the gossip of what I'm up to behind the scenes as well. Costing you not a bean is to subscribe at your podcast home of choice, and also costing you not a bean is to leave ideally a hugely positive review too. This podcast is an independent. It does not have a big company behind it. And so if we're going to exist in the world of algorithms and AI and other things I don't understand, it's reviews and it's people subscribing that are helping getting us noticed. Thank you to everyone who does it. Thank you to everyone who helps spread the word. This podcast would not still be going were it not for you. I'm also a print film nerd. I love magazines and I love movies, and so in a money where mouth is moment of madness, I launched a couple of print film magazines. They are for sale now at store.filmstories.co.uk. Film Stories issue 52 is about to go on sale. It is the UK's biggest film magazine at 168 pages. I don't know many magazines bigger than that in the world of film in the world. You can find the latest issue of that just going up for pre-order now. And then another magazine, I just don't think there's anything quite like it, Film Junior, which is a film magazine for youngsters. They write chunks of it as well. And the latest issue of that is also pretty much done. And you'll be able to pick that up at store.filmstories.co.uk. It costs a fortune to get these into newsagents and stores. So I do sell them primarily by mail order and subscription. Thank you to everybody, again, who supports and spreads the word of them. That is, though, the end of the parish notices. And as this is an episode of Film Stories that's got indie movies and indie movie successes at its heart, I'm now going to dig into, another success story in the independent space, arguably the breakout hit of 2024. Let me play you a clip from the trailer of it. I'll come to the story the other side of this.
Is it scary being a lady FBI agent?
Yeah. Take a nice long look. A letter was left with the bodies. Signed with one word.
I saw a beast rise up out of the sea with 7 heads and 10 horns. And on his horns he wore 10 crowns. And on each head was written a blasphemous name.
What aren't you telling me?
He'll kill and kill again.
I know you're not afraid of a little bit of dark. Because you are the dark.
I am, that's a fair point, That was a clip from Longlegs from 2024, written and directed by Osgood Perkins and starring Micah Monroe, Blair Underwood, Alicia Witt and Nicolas Cage. About time he was back on here. So, with due respect and deference to the Cage, he does make a lot of films, and most of them don't really trouble the inside of a cinema for more than a week or two, but as he's pointed out in interviews, and it's hard to disagree with him, he commits to them. There's no turning up and not putting in a shift. And also, most of them don't go on to become the indie hit of the summer. Longlegs, though, is a really refreshing story of success in 2024 and really an independent movie that's absolutely struck gold. So it started with the brain and pen of writer-director Osgood Perkins, and he talked about how it's a deliberate one-for-one relationship, the whole idea behind the movie. He says, when I sat down to write the film, the question in my mind was, what's the invitation to the audience that I can make early on that sort of gets people in the roller coaster car? What gains them admission to the world? And so for him, what he did was he lent on a film I've covered before, 1991's The Silence of the Lambs. He was recounting this, and the quote I've just used comes from Gizmodo, and he talked about how, for me, Silence of the Lambs had been such a hugely impactful movie. He described how it came out when he was around 15 or 16, when he really started getting interested in films, and all of a sudden, he reconciled, you're handed this immaculate thing. Silence of the Lambs wasn't the only influence on the film as well, although he did use it as a sort of template just to lure people into it, that he kind of figured people would be familiar with that kind of setup, and then you can put your kind of story turns and twists in there. He was also influenced by a real-life murder case, which I don't really want to go into in great detail, but he said in an interview with People as well, that the film that he was going to write was also a little to do with his father being Anthony Perkins of Psycho fame, and how his mother shielded his father's sexuality from the world. And so, going back to Jonathan Demme's The Silence of the Lambs, he used that as the tool to get the audience invested in the first place before taking the turns that his story took. But he also, in slight deference to The Silence of the Lambs, used that film's 1990s setting. He was originally going to put the film in 1992, but then he realised for the moments where there was a picture of an American president hanging on the wall, he would have to use the George Bush the First. And so he just changed the timing a little bit so he could put Bill Clinton's picture up, although in interviews he suggests he's not really a fan of either of them. He also set the film in the Oregon area, which wasn't where it primarily shot, an area of America rich in serial killer history. And when he was writing the script as well, he put in just like lots of ellipses and pauses and quiet moments. He knew that those were going to be really important to the story that he was trying to get across and the impact of it as well. And so, in terms of the origins of that story, it was built, he told Variety, around the character of Longlegs. And the character Longlegs was one that had come to him long before he came to this particular film. He described how he tried to make himself fit into other projects I'd worked on. And Osgood Perkins said, when you're writing all the time and generating specs and no one's paying you or you don't have any source material, you are basically saying you're constantly making stuff up. And so Perkins's process is pretty much to write every day, just to get something down on paper, and that there are ideas in there that don't end up in every story, that are just written down and perhaps saved for something else. And so when he was putting his serial killer film together and working the movie out, he recalled he had this character, and this might be the time for that character to come out into the open for the first time. So he wrote his film and he was putting it together, and then it was a case of, well, who would you want in a film like this as well? Because at the heart of it, what he wrote was a two-hander, that as much as there are other roles in there, it is really the conflict, the contrast between the agent and the serial killer that sits at the heart of his story. And so Nicolas Cage, his name came up in conversation when someone told Osgood Perkins that Cage had actually read the script. And as soon as he heard his name, he jumped to try and get him involved in the picture. Now, Cage would commit to it fairly quickly as well, and would take on a producer role of Longlegs, but also he would get really deep into the movie, that he'd get involved in the look and the design of his character, of things like the wig choice, the makeup, the costumes. And as much as Osgood Perkins wrote a chunk of this in the script, Cage was also a really significant part of all of this. He'd originally actually, Osgood Perkins thought that the character would have a bit more of a glam rocky style of look before they went with an identity for the character of Longlegs that would suggest actually what he's gone through is a load of botched plastic surgeries. And it was in November 2022 that Cage was, the film was revealed at that point, but Cage was said to have been around it at that point, even though the announcement of his involvement wouldn't come for a little while yet. In fact, the casting announcements wouldn't pop up until February 2023, when pretty much the film shoot was done and dusted. Nicolas Cage was on board first, though, of the cast, from what I can glean. And so the person to play opposite him, well, the role would go to Michael Monroe. And as Perkins would explain, it was the irreconcilable difference between Monroe's personality and the characters that she embodies on screen is what drew him to her. And so he was discussing this with Variety, and inevitably the brilliant film It Follows comes up. It Follows is a film I've covered before. I really love that film. from Munro's perspective, she explained a little bit of how she came to it in a conversation with Variety. And she talked about when she first saw the script, what she took from it was how uncomfortable the character of Lee was in most social situations. And as she said, what she's comfortable is looking at bloody crime scene photos. I don't mean that in the expletive kind of way. It's crime scene photos with blood. And trying to figure out what the knife was doing. Turns out Nicolas Cage was also a huge fan of Michael Monroe as well, and keen to get her on board. I'll come to the pair of them shortly. In terms of the preparation for the film, I mean, a lot of the work was being done towards the back end of 2022, and it was over Christmas of 2022 that Cage was really working on trying to get this character right. Ahead of that, I mean, he talked to Entertainment Weekly about the influence he took really from his mum, and about how when he was 2 years old, he remembered his mum putting on some special cold cream in the bathroom, and he says, I opened the bathroom door to see what she was doing, and he said for no reason she turned her face really fast and stared at me after putting on the cold cream, and just said he remembered how the whiteness of that cream really just spooked me. The process that he was undergoing throughout the Christmas period of 2022, and it was right through to Christmas Day as well. In fact, Osgood Perkins got a phone call off Cage on Christmas Day. He was working on getting the dialogue right for the character, and so Perkins got the call at 4 a.m, giving him quote sound bites of the actor rehearsing the dialogue as per the Hollywood Reporter. Cage was also shooting rehearsals himself on his phone and was recording himself and was just trying to get this right. And what this meant was by the time he landed in Canada for the shoot, he was on it. He knew how he wanted to play this character and how to put him on screen. So the shoot itself would begin on January the 16th, 2023. It would run through to February the 23rd, 2023, primarily in the Vancouver area. And as Perkins would tell RogerEbert.com, the script that he turned up on set with was, quote, very finished, that he'd worked it, he'd got it right. This wasn't a case of trying to find the direction and the approach of the film on the set of the movie. The work had been done in advance, not least by cinematographer Andre Orochi Tinagero, and there's a really distinct look to Longlegs, which you'll know just what I'm talking about if you've seen the film. But this was a collaboration between the pair of them to give it just a kind of distinction that a lot of films in its genre don't particularly get at the minute. So just look at the way that Andre Orochi chose to shoot Nicolas Cage in the film. I mean, the character of Longlegs is not in the film tons. I don't want to go very spoilery on it. It's certainly a presence in the movie. But when you see him, the way that he's shot is really kind of off kilter. And they were looking for offbeat angles. They were looking for ways that you could just catch glimpses of the character rather than putting him fully in the frame. This was no movie star performance. This was trying to put across a character in a really unusual way that you couldn't imagine too many star actors would be particularly happy with. However, between Perkins and Orochi, they kind of knew what they were looking to do here, and also Nicolas Cage knew what he wanted to do as well. I mean, again, going back to Entertainment Weekly, but in a different interview, he says, I was coming at it from what exactly was it that drove my mother insane? And he described it as a deeply personal kind of performance for me because I grew up trying to cope with what she was going through. He would describe how she would talk in terms that were kind of poetry, and he says, I don't know how else to describe it. I tried to put that in the Longlegs character because he's really a tragic entity. He's at the mercy of these voices that are talking to him and getting him to do these things. In terms of the interrogation sequence that takes place between Cage's character and Michael Monroe's character, I mean, they're coming to the end of the shooting time they had with Nicolas Cage, and as Michael Monroe described to Variety, it was his last day, and they'd been filming with him for 5 days. The director chose to not have me see anything, not meet him, not see what his face looked like. And they'd basically been kept pretty much apart during the shooting of the film. They certainly didn't socialise. The idea was that when they met on screen, they were sort of meeting for the first time. And Munro described how he created this character, this thing, and so I was so nervous. And she described how the assistants brought me up to this door that enters into the room where he is. The cameras start rolling on me and the director calls action. I open the door and it was incredible. I wasn't in a room with Nick Cage. I was in a room with Longlegs. And she described how after we finished that scene, we're sitting across from each other and he leans over in his full makeup of it and everything and says, "Oh, I'm such a big fan of you." Now, the soundscape of Longlegs is also really important. Eugenio Battaglia was the person behind that. And, I mean, he was coming up with all sorts of, again, off-kilter, offbeat techniques. He described how he knew what he needed. How, for instance, for one effect, he grabbed a 360 ambisonic microphone. I'm sure some of you know what that is. And this is a type of microphone typically used in ASMR audio and video. I've always thought of doing a sideline in Brummy ASMR, but haven't quite got there yet. Maybe I should try it on something like this. And so it got a microphone, started to rub a towel over it and whisper into it just to create this really strange audio concoction. It proved to be incredibly effective. By the time the film had wrapped up shooting on February the 23rd, 2023, it had cost just under, $10 million to make. Neon was backing the movie, and Neon would come to the fore with the way that the film was also promoted. Here is part of the genius of the film, that not only did the film itself turn out particularly well, but the way it was promoted, really something of a masterclass in how to do it. The promotional campaign for Longlegs, which was running right through early 2024, cost roughly the same as the movie. I've covered films on this podcast where studios have spent 100 million or so to promote their movie. They spent about 10 million on this. And I mean, going back to Osgood Perkins' conversation with Gizmodo, he talks about how he can really take no credit at all, or only tiny bits, for the marketing of it. And he said, none of it was my idea. I was involved as much as they wanted me to be. And he said, when Neon took the project on, I could tell how palpable their excitement was. And I could tell that they were really connecting with the footage and the materials that we made. And he just said, I just trusted them inherently, and it really worked out. His sole request for the promotion was that Neon maintained the aspect ratio of the film in the marketing materials, but Neon again turned that very much to its advantage, that it would play trailers alongside horror movies for months leading up to the release of it. But what it didn't do was spend money on posters or anything like that. It went entirely digital with its promotion outside of those trailers that were accompanying movies in cinemas, or even those were supplied digitally if we want to go down that road. It released over the course of 90 days, building up to the movie. The movie's release, 11 videos, not really an awful lot. And what was interesting about those videos is what it didn't show. It's what they didn't show as much as what they did. That we knew this was a Nicolas Cage film, or that certainly Nicolas Cage was in it, but they hid him in the film's promotion. They were taking a leaf out of the book of film like Seven as much as they were from Silence of the Lambs as well. Again, not going into great detail on that at the moment. But they were really choosy about the clips that they put out. They were really choosy about the tone that they conveyed as well. And the whispers were starting to come forth. I mean, Neon might have something a bit special here. It was also giving it a high summer release as well. So this is counter programming where it used to be really effective, where alongside a big blockbuster film, you will get another movie come along that just offers a counter choice, a real contrast to what else was out there at the time. And Neon was putting Longlegs out against Despicable Me 4 and Fly Me to the Moon, a re-release of The Lion King. And there was a lot of competition out in the marketplace, but it's still committed to this kind of high summer release of the film. There were other things that it didn't do as well, because Neon had only picked up the rights to the movie in February 2023. It'd done so at the European film market, and the film had a screening at Beyond Fest in Los Angeles at the end of May 2024. But it didn't really have the traditional festival rollout you might have expected of a film of this ilk as well. Instead, what Neon did is it put on a few select preview screenings that were taking place in the week leading up to the release of the film. And it was just pushing this really clever, really taut promotion to Longlegs. It was getting noticed. And so, just going into the tactics it used as well, there was one trailer of the film that really just caught my attention really, really quickly, where they used the heartbeat, an actual heartbeat, but it was Micah Monroe's actual heartbeat, the heartbeat of her when she first sees Nicolas Cage's transformation into Longlegs. And so, in that particular promotional spot, Micah Monroe's resting pulse is said to be 76 beats a minute. And then when she comes face to face with the Longlegs character in the way that I previously described, it went up to 170. And this particular clip captured that as well. The film, therefore, it went before reviewers, and they certainly helped. Reviews don't really make or break a film, but still, the word of mouth on Longlegs was really, really strong. That as something just different, and something that very, very contrasting to the rest of the movies that were out in the marketplace at that point. And so, it wasn't even a case that everybody universally loved it or anything like that, but there was a sense that there was something quite special and offbeat here, and some people went for it. Some people were calling it a masterpiece and really, really loving the film. But there was enough that Neon could work with that it would back up the promotional campaign that it put out. And so out it went into cinemas, July the 12th to the 14th, 2024 in the US. And it opened with $22.4 million. Now, to put this into context, in the last 10 years, there have been only, I didn't know this, I discovered this fact researching this film, only 15 independent studio releases in the past 10 years have opened above $20 million. For Nicolas Cage, he hadn't had a film open at the box office above $20 million since the second Ghost Rider film in 2011. And the feeling was, the Hollywood Reporter dug into this, it was the word of mouth that was really powering the film, that there was so much that was not given away by the promotion. People were keen to find out what actually was in the movie itself. Now, the number one movie was Despicable Me 4 on its second weekend with 43.5 million. I don't think there's much crossover audience between Despicable Me 4 and Longlegs, happy to be proven wrong. Inside Out 2 sat in third place on its fifth week of release. The new openers that weekend, though, the big one was Fly Me to the Moon, backed by Apple's money and put into cinemas by Sony. And that really didn't do an awful lot of business at all. I will come to that in the future. I think that's quite an interesting case. Bad Boys Ride or Die, that was still around. That was still in cinemas after 6 weeks, doing perfectly fine. Horizon and American Saga Chapter 1 on week number 3 was in trouble. Maxine, Sound of Hope, The Story of Possum Trot, and Indian 2 rounded out the rest of the top 10. Longlegs, though, it continued to pull its audience in. On its second weekend out, it dropped 46% of its business. Now, that's way, way below what you'd ordinarily expect of a summer release. The week after Twisters came out, which I've covered previously, thanks to an interview with Lee Isaac Chung, which you can find back in the archive. But Longlegs still in fourth place. The week after, it was down to fifth. It dropped 43% on its second week after dropping 46% on its first. And the word of mouth was still working. By the time it finished its US box office run, 74 million, outside of the US, 34 million, for a total worldwide cinema gross of $108 million. In the UK, that was the biggest territory for it outside of America. But what was really to the film's credit was this was proving that an independent film could exist after all in the summer marketplace. And since the days of pandemic lockdowns, there was some feeling that independents didn't really stand that kind of chance anymore. What the Neon team and what Longlegs have proven is if you've got the right film backed by the right marketing campaign, there was still a way to break through. And the success of Longlegs has given an awful lot of independent filmmakers just hope that the cinema is still a good outlet for their films. It's really expensive to go for a cinema release. It's probably the hardest thing to do in terms of getting your film out into the world. It costs you a lot of money. It's a real gamble. Just look at how much, I mean, Apple has put, 3 or 4 films out that cost it 200 million a piece and has now run away from cinemas. Such is the difficulty of that marketplace. Longlegs found a way through all of that through one of the best word-of-mouth marketing campaigns we've seen. I mean, we're on the level of things like the Blair Witch Projects and things like that compel people to get to a cinema to see the film. In the aftermath of it, Nicolas Cage has obviously made several films since, but he's also stated it's the only time he's ever going to play a serial killer on film. In fact, talking to IndieWire about that, he said, "I know that the phone's going to be ringing off the hook to play serial killers after Longlegs. And that's not really what I like to do." He said, "I don't like violence. I don't want to play people who are hurting people." The Longlegs story then, by the time it came out in cinemas, Osgood Perkins was already coming to the end of his next film. And so coming up from him is 2025's The Monkey, which I've not seen at this point. That's coming out at the start of 2025, based on a story by Stephen King as well. Longlegs, meanwhile, I can't tell you at this stage. It's been recorded before award season really gets underway. I can't tell you if it's going to interest awards bodies or anything like that. What I can tell you is this is a really bold film, sold in a really bold way, that has somehow managed to cut through. And that brings me to the end of this latest episode of Film Stories. As always, thank you so much for listening and thank you for your time. If I've not bored you completely, you can find more from me on Twitter and Blue Sky at Simon Brew. You can find more from the entire Film Stories project on both of those platforms at Film Stories. At facebook.com/Film Stories Online. YouTube.com/Film Stories is where you'll find a lot of video stuff that I'm doing now. I'm putting reactions, I'm putting trailers, I'm putting an assortment of videos. If you can head there, ideally like, subscribe, press all the buttons that I don't quite understand, that would help enormously as well. Where else are we? We're at Facebook. I've done Facebook. We're at Instagram and Threads, Film Stories Magazine UK. And then there's our online store, store.filmstories.co.uk. That's where you'll find all of our print magazines. It's where you'll find our UK exclusive Blu-rays of the films No Way Out and Bull Durham, with special Film Stories extras on both of those. And then if you go to filmstories.co.uk, that is updated. It's our clickbait-free entertainment website. Again, we're trying to do something that cuts against the grain a little bit at the moment. Imagine an entertainment website that doesn't do clickbait, that doesn't just try and annoy you with things like that. We've got one, but we need your help because Google doesn't like things like that. We've learnt that. If you go to filmstories.co.uk, you'll find all of that there. But I think that's it, really. The main thing, as always, is that you all stay safe and well. You all take care of yourselves. I've done 2 indie horror-esque films this particular episode, so you watch out. You stay safe. Keep the lights on. I'll be back soon with some more film stories. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.